Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're talking the return of Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders. A general spoiler warning for today, as I will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. So you have been warned, but with that out the way, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, so I know the hype is building for the upcoming return of the Phoenician, but I wanted to discuss the possible return of the big man Vulkan today, as there's a definite link in the lore that could possibly explain a Vulkan return after Fulgrim. It's a topic we've discussed a little already, with Vulkan's hatred of the Emperor's children, due to their actions on the Throne World during the Siege of Terra. It was information that came to light in the Salamanders Codex supplement a few years ago now, with the hunt for Fabius Bile. Upon Terra, the colossal destruction at first hid one of the truly horrific crimes of the heresy. When the Emperor's Children Legion had assaulted Terra, alongside the other followers of Horus, they took little part in the attack on the Imperial Palace, and instead fell upon the Throne World's population. They hunted and killed the lowly scribes and adepts of the Administratum in idle moments of pleasure, and slaughtered uncounted souls simply to render their bodies down into an array of stimulants and drugs. The orchestrator of this horror was the infamous apothecary turned gene torturer, Fabius Bile, who had afterwards escaped Terra with a small retinue of surgically altered warriors. When Vulkan learned what had taken place, his usually controlled demeanour came close to erupting. Here was a reprisal the depleted Salamanders could undertake, and Vulkan vowed to bring Bile to justice. We're told how Vulkan pursued the Emperor's children and Bile, eventually ensnaring and cornering him upon the world of Arden 9, ultimately forcing Bile to flee, where he then seemingly became swallowed by a warp rift, where you suppose Vulkan then ended his hunt, believing Fabius dead, or at the very least stopped. And with the expected upcoming return of Fulgrim to the setting, the re-emergence of the Emperor's children to the galactic stage, you'd expect them to unleash and impact the galaxy in a big way. I mean, it has to happen, surely. It's a major return. And, well, the repercussions from that will be felt across the galaxy. Meaning wherever Vulkan is, he could hear or even witness the renewed depravity and carnage of the Emperor's Children Legion. Perhaps even hear word of Bile's continued existence, or of his brother the Phoenician. Either way, were Vulkan to hear, you would surely expect him to act, to protect humanity from the depravity of the Emperor's children once again, determined to rid the galaxy of their presence once and for all, making the perfect mechanic for a Vulkan return in my mind, lining him up to be the next loyalist return. However, while I definitely like the sound of that, Vulkan's pursuit and prosecution of Bile and the Emperor's children obviously wasn't the last we saw of him in the lore, and in fact we had a very prominent sighting of him after the years of the Scouring with the Beast Arises series. There, with the Imperium on its knees thanks to the returned Ork Empire, the revelation of Vulkan's whereabouts was revealed to be known by the Inquisition. That Vulkan indeed still lived, and was fighting alone on the far-off Imperial world of Caldera. Desperate to turn the tide, to save the Imperium, the acting Lord Commander Corland beseeched Vulkan in person to return, which he ultimately agreed to after ensuring Caldera was safe. And interestingly here, Vulkan did state there is another time, another war, he must return for, implying to me he could well know of his father's future plan, the Emperor's intended big fight back against the ruinous powers, the one we saw the Emperor envisage in the Siege of Terror, which we just happen to be in right now. But I digress. Vulkan seems a little out of character at times in the Beast Arises series, seemingly having trouble with his mind and focusing on the present. But I think that's because the series is a little older, more in line with Vulkan losing his marbles a bit post-Conrad, long before the rejuvenation and redemption of him we'd see in the later Heresy series. But he would still aid the Imperium against the Orks, leading the crusade to Ulanor within the novel The Beast Must Die, ultimately coming face to face with the Prime Ork, the Beast, within its temple Gargant, where Vulkan would apparently sacrifice himself by tackling the Great Beast into its power generator, powered as ever by the Ork War energy. Vulkan let his thoughts flow again. He reached out into the undulating War, tapping into the warp-born part of himself that had been for every Primarch a blessing and a curse. He allowed his primal essence to mix with that of the Orks, his Emperor-created body absorbing the surge of energy like a sponge. He allowed the pure Orkishness that had killed so many librarians to infuse his body. Vulkan felt the great beast tense, its thoughts moving to him with tectonic slowness, as it realised something was amiss. It tried to pull back the War, to wrest the raw Orkish power from the mind of the Primarch. Vulkan only had a moment before he lost the battle, before the power of the Orks and the last dregs of his life were both spent. With failing muscles, he thrust a doom tremor into the face of the great beast and detonated the power field generator. And thus this act would be the last we would see of the Salamanders Primarch, though we know thanks to his perpetual nature, it is most definitely not his end. So the question is, how will Vulkan return? Which of these two factors in Vulkan's past are more likely to lead to his return? Is Vulkan again out there somewhere in the galaxy, ready to return to halt the Emperor's children, to recommence his hunt for Fabius Bile, to face the Phoenician? Or could we see him return when the Orks rise to prominence once more, when Ghazghkull fulfills his prophecy to become a Prime Ork? Well, it's anybody's guess. Equally likely it has to be said to not involve either. I mean, we spent about 30 years waiting for L. Johnson to awaken beneath the rock, only for then, when he did wake up, for it to be somewhere else entirely. So honestly, anything can happen in the lore. Vulkan is absolutely not tied to either of these relationships. But we can only go by what we know, and these two parts of his history, his most recent history, definitely give theoretical clues, plausible reasons for his return to involve either. Now, as I've said, Primarch returns are most likely to always be focused on the war against the gods of chaos. And so you would assume that makes Vulkan's desire for vengeance against Bile and the Emperor's children the more likely scenario. And normally I would tend to agree. But the reason I can't here is because of how soon it is after Lion L. Johnson's return. I know it feels like he's been back a long time now, and he has been back a long time, but in lore, it hasn't been. I mean, we haven't even had him reunite with Guilliman yet. It's all really been a bit of a standstill. We still need to get a novel where we can see him reunited with his chapter, The Unforgiven, how he is adapting, and what his real intentions and thoughts are. So, Vulkan then returning? Surely not for a while. So for me that rules out the Emperor's Children angle. So maybe that makes an Ork involvement more likely. A Vulkan returns somewhere down the line, when Ghazghkull fulfills his potential. And that could make sense. The Necrons have had their turn as the big threat, with the Silent King's return. We've now got Hive Fleet Leviathan, and it's only a matter of time until the Orks receive their spotlight treatment, with Ghazghkull surely being the face of that, unifying his race. And in that scenario, if you wanted to bring Vulkan back, you could surely use him being immersed within the War energy as a possible narrative avenue. That somehow Vulkan now has a greater understanding of the Ork menace. Or he foresaw the rise of Ghazghkull within, knowing it's a threat that must be stopped. He won't be on Ulanor still, as for those that don't know, Ulanor is now the world of Armageddon, which is why Ghazghkull keeps returning to it, drawn back to the ancient homeworld of his kind. I'm pretty sure Vulkan would have been spotted by now if he were upon Armageddon. But having a Primarch return in the next Armageddon campaign, now that would be huge. So I have to admit, I find a Primarch return involving anything other than chaos a bit of a stretch. However, if I have to say what's the more likely between the Emperor's Children angle or the Orks, well, right now, you'd have to say the Orks. And given that ties in nicely to Vulkan's last known sighting, I think it would make for a fantastic return, and give something a little different to the war against chaos. Because, as we know, in the grim dark universe, there is more than one threat to humanity's existence. But as always everyone, what do you think? Could you see the return of Vulkan being tied to the upcoming return of the Emperor's Children, given his history and pursuit of Fabius Bile? Or could you maybe see a return of Vulkan tied with the rise of the Greenskins, with Ghazghkull becoming a new prime Ork, given Vulkan's last sighting, his sacrifice against the beast? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.